Hi, and thanks for downloading and listening to this talk. I'm looking forward to taking questions from attendees at the live online event after I've done this. My topic is publishing articles in academic journals. That's one of the key things which and early career researchers need to engage in. We can argue at length about whether a monograph or journal articles are more important. Humanities researchers probably need to be doing both, and starting with articles is a good way to building towards a monograph. So I'm going to take you through some of the processes involved in putting an article together and taking it through the publishing process from my perspective as a handling editor at a journal. I've been the associate editor on Polis, the journal for the history of Greek political thought, for 3 years now. Here's a list of things I've published. I would note that there are several rejections and revise and submits lurking within that article history. I've made some classic errors in my own article publishing career. I've also reviewed quite widely and got a lot of insights into the publishing process from that. So I'm going to share some of my experiences and advise people, hopefully, not to make some of the mistakes I've made. Here is a very much simplified diagram of the process from submission to publication, which my main point was to show that there are loops within that process where if you get to one point, you may need to go back and start again, but you should keep moving. Also, I've not put any time scale on each of these steps, and they can take days, they can take weeks, they can take months. The longest I've had an article take to appear is 4 years from initial submission to publication. That's an article which came out in Classical Quarterly a week ago. So be prepared to wait. So let's walk through this. You've got an article ready, and after this slide, I'll talk through how you get an article ready in the first place. But let's demystify some of the process of this submission to publication process. So you submit your article, you may email it as an attachment to an editor, you may have to go through an editorial management website, which might coax some of the right information, such as abstracts and keywords from you as you go along. That will usually go to the overall editor of the journal, who will take a quick look. They may read the whole article, they may just read the abstract. One of the things I really want to emphasize is that getting your abstract right is an important part of putting an article together and shouldn't just be a last-minute afterthought. So the editor will look at the article or its abstract coming in, primarily so they can assign it to a handling or associate editor. That's the role I have. So it then will be sent to that handling editor, and they will identify reviewers for it and send it out for review. It's typical to have 2 reviewers. Sometimes some journals have 3. Sometimes it's only possible, despite the very best efforts of the editors, to get 1 reviewer to produce a useful report in a timely fashion. And this is a process that can take up a lot of time. It may be that you have a reviewer who eventually produces an incredibly helpful report, but takes several months to do so. And another thing that I get to do quite a lot as a handling editor is to send apologetic notes to authors about, yes, this is taking a very long time. It's totally legit to check in on the progress of your article once it's been in this pipeline for a few months. So that's one outcome from the initial response by the editor. The editor, or indeed the handling editor, may look at the article and say, no, that isn't for us. For technical reasons, it may be too long. That's the most frequent reason I've desk rejected articles. Or it may be off topic for the journal. So again, for Polis, we have a view of what kind of subject matter we cover, and when an article just plainly isn't about political thought, the likelihood is that we will desk reject it. And I usually try and include a helpful note, even with a desk rejection, but technical desk reasons are usually why an article gets desk rejected. Very occasionally, because the article has other issues with its language or construction that mean it's just a very long way short of being publishable, even with a good polish up. So most articles, the vast majority, certainly for Polis, get sent out to review. We wait for the reviews to come in. The handling editor collates the reviews and may add some comments, such as reviewer one is very enthusiastic, but please don't do this thing they suggested, or you're going to unbalance the article and make it too long. And so you then go into a second set of loops. You may be asked to make minor changes, and at some point the article will be accepted in that process, or you may be asked to revise and resubmit, in which case the article sort of goes around the same loop as a desk reject, but comes back in at a further stage in the process. So a revise and submit would be a more thorough rewrite and reconstruction, and some journals will then send that revised and resubmitted essay out to the same reviewer. Some may choose a different reviewer, and that is the point at which you will need to sit down and do the hard work on improving the article. And again, we'll talk through that a bit more later. So whatever the level of changes you've been asked to make, you following the guidance you've been given by the reviewers and the editor will lead you into those last stages of the process, in which some minor edits, maybe getting some fine detail of the journal's referencing style right, goes into place. Many journals have a copy editing phase as well, and that's very helpful for picking up last minute difficulties or minor errors and typos. Then the article will be typeset, you'll be sent proofs to read, you'll typically be given a very short period of time in which to do that, send them back, and then for most journals, they'll go online pretty much immediately after that and eventually be allocated to a print volume. And if it's a journal that publishes in hard copy, you will get a hard copy version in due course. And that might be some time after the paper has been accepted and published online. So the important point is that each step in this process can take a very long time. It's also okay for you to ask for time if you need it during that process. But the thing you should always be prepared to do is start again, edit, and send out. Yes, this is the right slide. So what do you need to start this process? What needs to go into that top end? You need an original, solid piece of research, and it really has to do something new and interesting. That's something that varies a lot across the different subdisciplines of classics. So in archaeology, you may have a new and unpublished object, epigraphy, a new and unpublished inscription, or papyrology, a new and unpublished text, and that's a very obvious thing to publish as an article. Otherwise, what's really important is that you engage with current debates in the specialist area and that you're aware of the latest scholarship. You should have been doing that as part of your research anyway, but it's always worth checking through the latest editions of journals, checking through the online publication pages. Is there anything about your topic that you should have engaged with? And by engaged with, I mean read and made a substantive comment about, not just stuck in the footnotes, which is something people sometimes do when, especially with things it's been suggested they read in the revision process. One way I like to think about this is using that famous distinction between the hedgehog and the fox that comes from the archaic poet Archilochus, but was taken up by Isaiah Berlin. And I think that articles, it's good to think of them as things that should be hedgehogs rather than foxes. You need to be a fox, you need to know a lot of things, but your article needs to be a hedgehog, and it needs to do one thing really, really well. There just isn't space in the length of a journal article to engage with more than one significant topic well. And it's much better to use the space to go into your one thing deeply and engage with the scholarship and discuss the text or the object or the argument in fine detail, rather than trying to slam too many examples in and not having the space to go into them in depth. How you put together the article is also going to be important. This is something that you will have already learned in your writing for your courses, but master's and PhD level. But signposting is even more important in journal articles and is very helpful to reviewers of journal articles who will be reading your paper quite quickly, and helping them find their way through it is going to be very helpful, and that will also be beneficial to future readers when it's published. And you need something that can be the right length. And this is something that is the thing that people find difficult. I know I find it very difficult. And it is the prime reason why I desk reject articles, is that they are the wrong length. They can be too short, not long enough to engage with the topic deeply enough, or they can be too long and not focused enough. I mean, a typical length for a journal article is 8,000 to 10,000 words, and that may well be inclusive of bibliography rather than exclusive of bibliography, as is often the way with coursework. So you may find that there's a frustrating difference in length between what a journal wants and the piece of work in hand that you have. And I think that this is where focusing on one section of a chapter rather than trying to cram the whole chapter into a journal length is really the right approach to take. Your article will probably get longer as it accretes suggestions from reviewers. That is a problem, and usually when that happens at Polis, I don't get too worried about it, but I might be on the prowl for long digressive footnotes that can be cut out to keep the article to length. But as I say, finding the right length, editing your work to the right length, choosing a section of writing you have that is roughly the right length. That's going to be really helpful. So keep looking for that piece of work to send out, and you may have several. You may find it hard to find one. If you're working on a funded project on a specific theme, it's very likely that your PI will give you an article-shaped piece of work to do. But feedback from supervisors, PIs, examiners, they may well be the best people to advise you both on what would make a good article and where to send it. But you can also get feedback from friends and peers. Having other people read your work and spot the place where you repeat yourself or where you say something inconsistent is incredibly helpful. You might also use the WCC UK short-term mentoring scheme to good effect. So be ready to let go and send it out. Another thing that you can use at PhD level is to publish in a student publication, perhaps a collection of papers from a conference like AMPAL and AMPA. That is a really good process to go through if you're not familiar with the publishing process. You can learn a lot from that. You can learn a lot from participating in that publishing process as an editor. I'd be beware of handing out your very best work for that process, but it's possible that you can get a good experience from that, which you can build on for future submissions. Choosing journals, I think, is really important, and the number one point is don't just choose one. Identify a series of journals into which your article might fit, so that if you get a rejection that comes in, you've already got a plan in place for what you're going to do next with that piece of work. A general journal might not be the best fit for your article. You might actually do better looking at something in your field. You might also get published more quickly in a specialist article. The Classical Quarterly has a long publication backlog, and I think some other journals do too. There's a lot to be said for having an article published in what we might call a top tier journal. But the cost of having your best piece of work tied up for several years before it comes out, I think, should be borne in mind. So if I was sending a piece of work to one of those journals, I'd want to have another piece of work in hand to send to a different journal and get a bit more input and maybe a publication sooner. Disciplinary focus is important. So journals in specialist areas are as prestigious as the big general publications. If you have a theoretical approach, a theoretical journal might very well be more suited to your work, and you might get more helpful feedback. Open access journals that publish online, some of those started out as traditional print journals, some of them are newer. Again, you'll get all the benefits of peer reviewing and feedback and commentary, but you will probably get quicker publication online and open access. It will be easier for people to get at your work, which is another important consideration. A sort of hybrid that's emerged recently are special editions and supplements to journals, which include papers, for example, from a conference, though they may be from a call for papers without a conference. So if you've presented at a conference that is going to be a journal special issue, if it's a prestigious journal, I would definitely make good efforts to do that. I think I did have a slide further on talking about that in more detail. There are some lists of journals. A current one is CleanEye. That's worth looking at. Also, do think about how often the journal publishes, because that can have a big impact on how long everything takes. Some journals publish 3 or 4 times a year, some only once. And a journal that publishes only once a year has fewer slots for papers and may be more likely to have a backlog, and less likely to take your work. So, special issues, pros and cons. You may still be rejected even though you presented at the conference and took part. Some people look down on special issues a bit, but I think that there's a lot of positives, because your work is going to be sitting there with highly complementary work by a variety of people, and that will help your work gain traction with the other presenters and with readers interested in your special area. So the project I worked on, Anachronism and Antiquity, we published our conference proceedings as a special issue of Classical Receptions Journal, and I was very happy with that. Do go and have a look at that issue, because I think it shows how a journal like that can work. So preparing to submit your work, work hard on your abstract. You may well have an abstract from when the paper was first submitted to a conference as a paper. It will probably need to be shorter, 150 words rather than 300, but really do your best to make it punchy and make it accurate. Make sure that it represents the article well. It's incredibly frustrating as an editor to get an abstract that sounds really, really interesting and then read the article and discover that it doesn't really quite get to the topic it says it's going to be talking about, or skirts around the argument or major claim it says it's going to be making. So do work hard on your abstract. Choose keywords carefully. They're going to do a lot of work for online discoverability, search engine optimization. Work hard on style, referencing style, punctuation, abbreviations, translations. It is the worst thing about journal publishing that journals ask authors to put their article manuscript into that journal's style for referencing at the point of initial submission. That I think isn't great. It's much more easily addressed for journals that are using styles that can be managed easily using referencing software, and also for scholars who use referencing software. So if you're just having to choose a different EndNote output style, it's not very much work. But EndNote can't cope with the style of several major classical journals. So beware that there is going to be some work there. So I've listed issues that make articles easier to reject. I think I've mentioned all of those already. But I would highlight again, looking at important recent work in the area and making sure the article isn't too long for the journal's publishing limits. Once your article's been sent out for review, you will eventually get some reviewer reports. And I think this is the stage that a lot of people find difficult and upsetting. The point of the report is to be critical, to highlight weaknesses, to suggest ways in which the article could be made stronger, to play devil's advocate against positions the author has taken, to suggest literature that would be relevant to the points and hasn't been considered. Some reviewers will go through all the smaller details and list all your typos for you. So when you're working through the report, keep careful notes as you go along. Most journals will ask you to supply a report with your revised version that documents your response to the report and the changes you've made. on a point-to-point basis. And I certainly have had cases where an author has strongly disagreed with a reviewer's assessment and has made a case that the reviewer had misunderstood what they were saying or had gone off point themselves, and that they would restate the case for the argument they were making and make it more powerful that way without exceeding the point to the reviewer. So it is possible to push back against reviewers. The review shouldn't be abusive or dismissive of you or your work, even if it's being critical. And I always read all reports carefully. I have once or twice taken out sections or statements from reports which I thought an author might well feel was unduly critical. I've never seen the gross sexism that some people have reported, but that definitely is an issue. But the report should be more harsh and direct than feedback from advisors on your graduate coursework. In most cases, it's possible you had a harsh advisor, in which case you'll be very familiar with the genre. But I don't think you should expect a review report to be entirely a comfortable experience, but you should expect it to be useful and to help you make your work better. So final stages, things to do. You should upload the accepted manuscript version to your university's repository for open access purposes. You should take care in submitting the final version. It's really important to do this right, because this is your very last chance to do this as a proof stage, and you really, really don't want to be making a lot of changes at proof stage. So this is the point where you should really go through and make sure that you've dealt with any repetitions or clumsy phrases, so that they're gone, they're not there when you get the proofs. Proofs should really be for very minor typos, things that have gone wrong in the typesetting process, rather than authorial corrections that you could have made at an earlier stage. It's not unheard of for proofs to go seriously wrong. My first set of proofs for my Classical Receptions Journal article had lost all the italics from the paper, and I sent it back and was sent new proofs very quickly, and something had gone a little bit wrong and it was easily fixed. And there's no alternative to slow and careful reading of print copy. Some people read more carefully than I read these slides before I started recording. There's some people read aloud, and that can be helpful, or you might find it excruciating. Proofreading is just not fun. You have to make yourself do it. But the way to make it less painful is to have fixed things before you get to the proof stage. Last thing, once you've published, you really need to promote your work. Social media, blogs, department, college news, online repositories like Humanities Commons. If you don't have an ORCID ID, set one up. That's a really useful thing to have, and can also link in with your university's depository. So your university might require you to register an ORCID account. Send off prints to people who helped, especially those whom you thanked in your acknowledgements. If you kept copyright in the article, which depends on the publisher, remember to register yourself with the ALCS for borrowing payments. Follow up any opportunities that arise from your article People will get in touch with you and ask you about your research and ask you to do things. It's very likely that you will also get peer review invitations, and do accept those if you can. Once you've been published, you are qualified to be a peer reviewer. And I certainly invite new authors to review incoming articles in their field, and find that they often do provide reports, sometimes of a higher, more detailed quality than long established scholars. So please do that. I think I've gone through everything I meant to mention. If you're watching this prior to the ECR event, I'll be very happy to take your questions. If your work is in my field, I'm very happy to give you informal comment and advice if you'd like to get in touch directly. So thank you. I hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to your questions.